Magos Technicus Tathix Shon hesitated. Despite the urgency of the situation, her need to act was overridden by an uneasy blurt of contradictory data from her internal augmetics. She paused in an open hatchway, gripping its frame with one metal hand to steady herself. Her Skitarii halted with her, a few glancing at one another, crimson optics fizzing with unease in the gloom of the poorly lit corridor. Distant screams carried to them from some lower deck, flesh voices and binaric wails entwined. The portions of Magos Shon's face that were organic twisted in consternation as data spooled through her cortex, insisting she had suffered a terrible wound when all evidence was to the contrary. Plasmembrane sheaths nictitated across her visual lenses as she isolated and purged the erroneous data. She examined and then impatiently excised several more data artifacts: a corrupted timestamp, impossible energy readings, and a secondary cortical alarum. I have no time for such nonsense, she thought, and goaded herself into motion. The lumens studding the corridors of the Explorator bark Savant were flickering as though the ship's machine spirit were distressed. Smoke drifted in thin runnels along the ceilings, flowing from somewhere deeper where violence had doubtless been done. Yet Magos Shon did not fear harm at the hands of the Xenos that had boarded her vessel. Rather, she felt the need to punish them for their presumption in setting foot upon this blessed bark of the Omnissiah. If she feared anything as much as so heavily augmented a being, as she still experienced base human emotions, it was the risk that the alien boarding party might imperil the device. That was why she made haste through the passages and chambers of the Savant, accompanied by her Skitarii clades and hulking Castellan robots, to reach the vault that contained the device and ensure it was secured against hostile alien threats. And then, she thought with fierce satisfaction, to unleash its sacred might upon the Xenos' filth. Magos Shon had brought the device all the way from the deep vaults of her forge world. Styges 8 harboured many such ancient treasures of the Omnissiah, and, though perhaps she should have sought more explicit permission from her superiors before liberating this one, Shon was certain that the machine god would not begrudge her the use of one in so holy a crusade as this. To strike at the heart of the pariah nexus, to comprehend the twisted uses the deviant Xenos had found for precious noctilith, and to reclaim that vital substance for the use of the Omnissiah's servants, such was surely holy work. It was also, as this present situation demonstrated all too neatly, perilous. Hence, Magos Shon's choice to liberate the device and its auto-reliquary, and bring it with her in secret. She did not doubt that such a gift of the Omnissiah would prove its worth when unleashed upon the heretical androids that had boarded Savant. She just needed to reach it and unshackle it from its bonds first. The Skitarii vanguard of Clade Omega. Primus Row led the advance. They tramped along corridors of brass and brushed steel and clattered down spiraling iron stairways. Their radium carbines swept every hatchway and shadow. Their optic lenses burned with purpose in their iron-clad helms. Such loyal protectors would allow nothing to harm their mistress, Shon knew. For all that, she was glad of Clades Omega Secundus Rho and Omega Tertius Thetis, stiffening her force's numbers, and for the trio of massive castellans that surrounded her protectively, while their datasmith, Hing, scurried in their wake. Reaching the bottom of another stairwell, the Skitarii of Omega Primus Rho reordered themselves smoothly, preparing to push through the heavy, cog-shaped bulkhead door before them. This portal, Shon knew, led onto the deck where the device languished in its vault. She also knew, thanks to the constant inload stream of her advanced augmetics, that Xenos contacts were reported approaching the vault from the opposite direction. Time is our enemy here, she thought. Binaric hymnals rang out as the Skitarii Vanguard Alpha of Omega Primus Rho completed his interface abasement with the bulkhead door's machine spirit. "Clear to advance, Magos," he blurted to her. "Dispensation Skitarii Alpha 118RO, she replied in Binharic cant. "Serve with alacrity and offer the mercy of the machine." She received a fierce blurt of acquiescence. It was a popular sentiment within the Skitarii of Styges 8, the mercy of the machine. Shon supposed it constituted a form of humour. Machines, after all, performed their function without compunction. There was no mercy to be found within their relentless iron hearts. The bulkhead door cycled open amidst the tolling of brass bells and fanfare of screeching Binharic choristry from cherubic servitors wired into alcoves above the doorway. The carmine strobe of emergency lumens spilt through, limning Omega Primus Rho for an instant as though drenching them in gore. Then they advanced, guns up, and the rest of Magos Shon's force followed them through. The Magos sensed at once that something was awry in this portion of the ship. The Savant had been part of a small Adeptus Mechanicus flotilla attempting to travel from the Mertica system to reinforce the Imperial defenders at Vertigus. The deleterious effects of the Nephilim anomaly had turned their journey into a grueling trial, as the vessels had dropped unexpectedly out of the warp time and again, suffering more attritional damage each time. Yet the empiric disjunction that had hurled Savant out of the warp had been an order of magnitude more violent and damaging than anything else the flotilla had experienced. It was why their sister ships had been forced to abandon them in their race to reach the Vertigus system, and why Magos Shon had become acclimatized to seeing damage wrought throughout the ship's corridors. All she had done for the past 5 Tempus Indomitus standard days was work at repairing that damage. There was something else at work on this deck, however. Shon saw the depressingly familiar buckled deck plates and burst conduits caused by the emergency translation from the warp. Yet she also noted tendrils of what appeared to be corrosion-furring consoles and stanchions. She vid-captured images of the corruption using secondary optics as she swept down the corridor and, upon analyzing the playback through one of her 3 backup cortices, was surprised to see that the rust was visibly spreading. Part of her consciousness watched with growing disquiet as fingers of corroding corruption spiderwebbed across a console, extinguishing indicator bulbs one by one. Each delicate glass oblong flickered crimson, then turned black as it was touched, glass cracking with sharp little clinks. Magos Shon reached out with her Omnissiah given senses, her disquiet growing as she tasted unnatural energies at work within the fabric of the ship. Whatever was happening, it involved mysteries of the Omnissiah that lay outside her own areas of study. Yet she could sense its effects well enough. The visual corruption was only one aspect of a creeping entropy that burned out bundled wires and corroded data matrices deep within Savant systems. Yet laced amongst these deleterious effects were stranger anomalies still. Shon's flesh face twitched again as her data senses touched upon a conduit amidst the damaged sections that instead seemed in perfect working condition. She interrogated its monitoring spirit with a thought and frowned more deeply at the unexpected answers it provided. It was impossible that this data conduit could have been installed this very day, fresh from the forges of Stygies 8. Yet all indicators asserted that such was the case. Shon was dragged away from investigating the anomaly further by the sudden fierce clamor of gunfire from up ahead. With a Binharic curse, she refocused her primary attention upon her surroundings. 117 feet further along the corridor, Magos Shon's internal auspex detected xenoform energy signatures. The strobe-lit murk of the corridor curdled further there, as flashes of emerald light silhouetted the Skitarii of Omega Primus Rho, who stood in close firing ranks and laid down a hail of radium rounds at the approaching aliens. One of Shon's devoted warriors was blasted from his feet, layers of metal and flesh billowing away from his body under the flaying energies of his killer's gun. Through the gap left by the fallen soldier, Magos Shon got her first look at the android Xenos advancing down the corridor. Killing light glinted in the artificial eyes of the Necrons. The ghoulish machine creatures shambled closer by the moment, their guns spitting beams of vivid green energy into the exposed Skitarii. Omega Primus Rho closed ranks and the enemy was lost to Magos Shon's sight again. Her followers were suffering, she knew, yet their sacrifices would be worthwhile. They had pushed far enough along the corridor before engaging the foe. Just 55 feet ahead of her, the Magos saw the armored door of the vault set into the corridor wall. Sending a swift blurt to her followers and commanding them to protect her at all costs, the Magos deployed her mechadendrites in a writhing halo and all but fell upon the access panel. "Enemy numbers increasing, Magos," blurted Skitarii Alpha 118 Rho to her as she worked. "Acknowledgement," she sent back distractedly. The vault had been sealed with thrice-sanctified data wards and would not be opened swiftly. "Enemy numbers increasing, Magos," blurted Skitarii Alpha 118 Rho to her once again. "Repetition is unnecessary," she sent back, tagging irritation against her tonal indicators.